Are you craving a trip on Space Mountain? Well, we've got the next best thing. Welcome to Dizney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Dizney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePauli, and today my friend Aaron Wallace, author of The Thinking Fan's Guide to Walt Disney World, joins me to discuss the holiday storytellers around World Showcase in Epcot. This is a tradition that has been part of the Epcot holiday experience for many years now, and it feels like the perfect way to celebrate the holidays in that particular park. Now, some of these storytellers have changed a lot through the years, while others haven't changed much at all. Whether they're still around in more recent years or have been retired, we discuss them all right after this. If you're anything like me, you can't wait for 2021 to begin and to say goodbye to 2020. So make sure you're prepared for the new year by ordering your 2021 Dizney Coast to Coast calendar. The calendar features original photos taken by me around the Disneyland and Walt Disney World resorts. The calendar is available as either a wall calendar or a desktop calendar. So head over to DisneyCoastToCoast.com and order your calendar today so that you can have a touch of Disney magic in your life every day of the new year. Your purchase helps support this very podcast and allows me to produce more free episodes for you into the new year. Once again, the site is DisneyCoastToCoast.com, or just click on the link in this episode's description.
What makes Disney magic more magical? The holidays.
Hello, Aaron, and welcome back to Dizney Coast to Coast. It has been a heck of a long time since you've been here. How you been, sir?
It's been a very long time. I'm doing very well. Very excited to be back here. Thanks for having me again. And it's great that we're talking about Christmas things because it wasn't all that long ago that you joined me on my podcast to talk about Disney celebrations at Walt Disney World and Disneyland. And so many people wrote in and loved hearing your thoughts on holiday celebrations at Disney. So I'm excited for part 2.
That was definitely a long time ago because I was like, when you were on my show, I was like, what did we talk about? That was, last year, I guess?
A couple years ago, I think.
Couple years? Geez, Louise. Yeah, that was a really good episode. Now that you mention it, I do remember recording that and loving that. So yeah, we should totally do a part 2 sometime. When are we getting another episode of your podcast, Aaron? Not to put you on the spot, but...
Hey, when it's a New Year's resolution, right? It's the time of year for that.
Well, today we're here to talk about the celebrations for the holidays at Epcot, most specifically the holiday storytellers. And I knew that you were the guy to talk with about this because you're such a big fan of it. And I gotta say, as a person who's never experienced it in real life, I'm such a huge fan just of this concept. I think it's wonderful. I mean, the easiest way to describe it is basically the countries around World Showcase each have a storyteller talking about the individual country's traditions. And before we get too far into this, I just want to mention that these have changed tremendously through the years. So today is not about what's happening at Epcot today in 2020. This is kind of just taking a look back. Some of it's still there. Some of it has been replaced, which we'll touch upon. But it's just kind of an overall history of things that have been there, haven't been there, and the various storytellers that we've seen through the years at World Showcase. And Aaron, when was your first time experiencing these in person?
You know, I want to say from the very beginning, I think the Storytellers started in 1996, and it would have been that year or soon thereafter that I had my first encounter with them. So it's really been, mostly a lifelong tradition for me to go around and hear these different storytellers. And I have to say, I love it as a huge fan of Christmas, but also as a huge fan of Epcot. I mean, to me, the World Showcase holiday storytellers are exemplary of the whole notion of Epcot edutainment, right? The idea of teaching people and inspiring people about the world around them, the world that's bigger than you or I, but doing it in a way that's entertaining and memorable and emotional.
And I will also add to that, I think that very much in the way how Epcot has moved from edutainment beginnings and straying more toward entertainment, I would say the same about these storytellers, which started very much as informative storytelling, in a lot of cases has become bands or musical performances. So I think that also is a sign of where Epcot is heading and has headed.
Gosh, I hadn't thought about that. The holiday storytellers being sort of, a part of the pattern of Epcot at large. But I think you're so right about that. And to me, it's regrettable, sort of the trend that's happening with the storytellers. And I guess we'll get into that as we go through them.
Yeah, let's start with Father Christmas over at the United Kingdom. I know this is one of your favorites. So why don't you take the lead on this one?
Yeah. So for those who don't know, this is at the back of the UK pavilion. And as you gather to wait for the storyteller's arrival, you hear him before you see him. And it's this giant bell that he's ringing. And he enters the back of the pavilion singing a Christmas carol. I think it's "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." Or
Here We Come a Wassailing.
Here We Come a Wassailing. That's right. Yeah. And he basically, if you want to picture this guy, he has Ghosts of Christmas Present energy.
100%. That is what I have in my notes. I'm like, this is the Ghost of Christmas Present from A Christmas Carol, which just so happens to be one of my favorite stories. So
he's
I'm glad
so
you feel that way.
And in fact, I'm really hoping someday we get a Muppet Christmas Carol version of this inside the UK pavilion at some point. But even without that, he kind of fits the bill because he does feel like that character, even though he's there as Father Christmas, which of course is the United Kingdom's version of Santa Claus. And so he's in this just enormous green robe, and he comes out ringing a bell once for every Christmas that has passed since the birth of Jesus. And he's in the 60s when he comes out, and he gets up to about 67 before he asks somebody, what's the year? And they'll say, 2019, 2020. And he's like, oh, we better leave the counting for later. And how about instead, I share with you some stories about how your own traditions, your Christmas traditions here in America, many of them originated in the United Kingdom. And he goes on to tell us about carols that originated there, Christmas cards. The very first Christmas card apparently was sent in the UK in the 1800s, and wassail, as you mentioned, Jeff. And this guy is just so freaking jolly. Like there's no other word to describe what he is. And I have often said, there's one performer who seems to be there very often in this same role. And I've often said, if there were awards for theme park acting, like I would want him to win the very first award. I wouldn't mind him being a Disney legend for the magic that he has brought to this role every single year.
I knew you were going to go there with the Disney legend. When I heard you say that, I was like, oh, he wants him to be a legend. I can tell. I know Aaron. But one thing I want to mention, my friend Mark over at Yesterworld Entertainment, he did a video all about World Showcase. And did you know at one point, I can't remember if this was going to be like a holiday overlay or a permanent thing, but there was supposed to be a Christmas Carol attraction of sorts, which kind of would have been awesome.
Yeah, I've heard about it and think it should absolutely happen.
Yeah, no, I really liked this guy as well. In a lot of cases, these storytellers are the Santa Clauses of their countries. In some cases, they're not. They're just talking about their traditions. But this one is very much, the Santa Claus of his country. It's Father Christmas. I think it's awesome. As you mentioned, the first Christmas card sent in England in 1843. I thought that was such a fun little nugget. And here's the thing with these. First of all, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are so many of these storytellers, it's impossible to catch them all in one day, right? Like you kind of have to pick and choose.
Yeah, I want to say at least nearly impossible. I don't know that I've ever tried. It would be very, very difficult because often the show times overlap, and it's not like you can just start on one end of World Showcase and just hit them as you move along. You have to be intentional about it, and you, out of necessity, end up doing a lot of zigzagging throughout World Showcase. So I usually will take like 2 full days to see all of these each year.
Wow. And have you started the process yet this year, or where are you at?
No. So holidays are not underway at Epcot for 2020. And there remains some confusion, best I can tell, as to whether or in what capacity these storytellers will be returning this year. I've seen conflicting information. I think the current update on the Walt Disney World website is a little ambiguous in its wording. So it remains to be seen.
One thing that this Father Christmas said that honestly, it's stupid, but it made me laugh out loud when I forget what he was trying to get the audience to sing along or something like that. And he goes, a 1, a 2, a here's your cue. Like, that is the dumbest, most wonderful thing I've ever heard. Is that a regular thing, or was he just in a spirited mood the video I saw?
Yeah, that doesn't come to mind, but there's a lot of great sort of gentle humor throughout all of these presentations. In this show, he will often ask a child, where are you from? And they'll say, whatever state. And he'll say, great place. I go there once a year. I think that's just such a great Santa joke.
Yeah, it's a lot of, playing Santa Claus or any version of Santa Claus. it's like it takes a special person. And there's a really phenomenal documentary out there. I don't know if I've ever talked about this. It has nothing to do with Disney, but it's called Becoming Santa. And have I told you about this, Aaron?
I don't think so.
Oh gosh, it's this documentary about a man who decides, he has lost the Christmas spirit. He doesn't really have family to spend it with, and he decides in order to find it, he's going to become a Santa Claus. And it shows the entire process of him getting the beard dyed and going to Santa school and doing parades and all these different things. I first saw it on the Oprah Winfrey Network and have since purchased the DVD in its annual viewing for me. And it's really phenomenal. It's called Becoming Santa. And, well, I don't want to spoil the end, so I won't say it, but it's a great, great, great documentary. Highly suggest it. So add it to your list.
I will. I love the idea of that, and I take the recommendation seriously, coming from the guy who wants to find twins who can be raised from birth to both play Santa in old age. Isn't that your big idea?
You're talking about for Walt Disney World?
Yeah.
So yeah, we've talked. Was this on your podcast? For those
it might have been.
Yeah. So basically, I have an issue with this is an adult Santa story, not a kid Santa story. So if kids are listening, I guess mute it. But I have a problem with the Disney Santas having fake beards, and I feel like they should have real beards. And for continuity's sake, I feel like there should be twins or triplets that can change out throughout the season and take on the role at the Disney parks. I think that I don't think that that's asking too much. I think it's ridiculous that you think that that's ridiculous, Aaron. The man who starts hanging his Christmas decorations on the stroke of midnight on Halloween night.
Correct. But listeners, this is the caliber of the Disney parks experience that we would have if Jeff DePauli were in charge.
It's true. I would insist, even if it took 40 years, I would raise triplets from birth to become the Santas of Walt Disney World.
Bob Chapek doesn't have that kind of commitment.
Oh, no. And he won't last that long, so that's fine. He'll be gone by then, so it's not a problem. But in any case, shall we move on to Papa Noel over in Canada?
We shall.
Okay, so this one's really interesting because this guy very much looks like a Santa Claus, except he has a green plaid shirt on when he comes out. He's carrying an axe. And one of the things that I really loved about this was that throughout the storytelling, when you first see him, he's one of these guys that, if you saw at a shopping mall, you'd be like, man, he looks like Santa. But as the story goes on, you see him start putting on some boots. Then he starts putting on some white gloves. Then the big red coat. Then the hat at the end. And eventually he is Santa Claus. You figure out that this man is Santa Claus, even though he never refers to himself as it. He's telling a story as if he's not. And it's just this super cute detail that I really enjoyed. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I love the way there's sort of this reveal, because you're right. When he comes onto stage, he's referring to himself as essentially a friend of Papa Noel and Santa Claus. I think he mentions them both. And I think he sort of implies that Papa Noel and Santa are the same person, but you're not supposed to understand that it's him. But then by the end, there's this very slow, dramatically effective reveal in which he never even comes right out and says that he is indeed Papa Noel, but you sort of, it's implied that he may be. And I love the mystery of that moment at the very end. I think it ties into a sort of a cinematic tradition where often, at the end of a Santa episode of a TV show or a movie, you're not quite sure if he was the real one. But what's interesting to me about the various Santa characters, and again, this is maybe a grown-up Santa discussion, not a child Santa discussion, but, and we'll talk about this more as we get into France, but the idea that as you go around World Showcase in one day, you encounter these different iterations of Santa. And if we are to accept that Santa is indeed Santa, what are we to make of that? The fact that there are all these different versions. Are they one and the same, appearing in different, versions of themselves, or are these different individuals? And the performers sort of tackle that question in different ways. And so here he sort of works his way around it without ever having to get into it in a way that I think is clever and fun.
Yeah, I think that this conversation, let's face it, is kind of a difficult conversation to have in a park geared for children. Even though Epcot is more adult than the other parks, it's a conversation that needs to be tiptoed around, and I think that they do a really good job handling it.
Yeah, I agree. Now, this is one of the performers who have been retired. So we now have a music group in place of Papa Noel. And to me, it's always sad to see one of these storytellers go. I think you did learn a lot from him. However, I think if you're going to get rid of any performer, it does make sense for it to be one of the 5 Santas who were part of the original holidays around the world. So I do understand this cut.
He was one of my favorite ones, though. I got to be honest. I really enjoyed him. I liked the way he told his story. Some fun facts as well. I didn't know that Canada grows most of the world's Christmas trees. Who knew? I know now because of this guy. And the group that's replaced him is the Canadian Holiday Voyagers. What do you think of them? I've never seen them, but are they a fine replacement?
Yeah, they're great. They're festive. And so some of these bands that have taken over make a point of talking about the traditions of the country in between songs. And this is one of them. Unfortunately, not all of the music groups do that. But yeah, it's great. And they do a nice combination of Christmas songs that are familiar to Americans and ones that aren't, but that are native to Canada.
And folks, as I mentioned, I've never actually witnessed these in person. So the way that I experience these are through YouTube videos. And even for these performers that are no longer part of the presentation at Epcot, you can easily go to YouTube and catch videos of them. And I highly suggest it. It's some really interesting stuff. And some of it's retired, some of it's still there, but it can all be found on the internet. Thank you for the internet. Yay, research. And let's move on because we got a lot of these to cover. So let's move over to France, shall we?
Yeah, so this is Paranoel, another of our Santa Claus figures.
Is this another future Disney Legend recipient?
I'd be okay with that. I don't think I have the emotional bond with Père Noël. I think I often see Father Christmas in the UK first and then head over to France. And he's just a little less ebullient. And maybe that's part of sort of the Père Noël presentation, by design. But nevertheless, he gives a really great rundown of Christmas traditions in France that are distinct from those that we know in America. And I think all the Western society pavilions do a good job of presenting the same holiday in a way that does seem different, which could be a challenge, I think. So the structure of his presentation is he pulls out a letter that was written to Père Noël from a young girl named Yvette, I think. And she's talking to him about her family's preparations for Père Noël. And it's a very nice framing device. So he uses her letter to sort of stop and give us, the audience, asides about French Christmas traditions. So narratively, it works very well, I think. He introduces himself as a quote unquote good friend of Santa Claus and talks about them as though they are two different people. So slightly different approach than what we had with Papa Noel in Canada.
Now, this character, he wears like a red bathrobe with a hood, same long white beard and everything, and he definitely has the Santa vibes, and those were that's not even fair. I was going to say those were probably my favorite storytellers, were the ones that had like the Santa vibe, but there were some others that definitely didn't, that were equally as interesting, I would say. I just really like this tradition. But yes, I like the setup of the letter. This was one of my favorite ones as well. I really liked it.
Yeah, and this is one of several of these storytellers whose story has built into it the well-worn Christmas narrative of a child who doesn't believe, but then comes to believe. And in this presentation, we get it in the form of Yvette's brother. I think it's Francois. She talks about how he doesn't believe until there's a visit from Père Noël. And then at the end of the story, his mind has been changed. And so I think it's nice to get a little bit of that.
Now, are there multiple performers playing each of these roles, or is it such a limited run event that they can have the same actor portraying the character throughout?
Throughout my many years visiting these shows, it tends to be the same performer day to day, year to year even. But obviously there are exceptions. No one's available to work 7 days a week. And so you do see sort of like the understudies, I guess, come in. And there are also
the swings. I want to see the swings who take on all the different roles.
I wonder if there are. But they're all consistently very talented. I've never seen a performer in any of these roles who are underwhelming to me.
Okay. Let's head over to Morocco, where we have the Tarji. And this guy, he has a very monochromatic white clothing with a white cap, or a red cap rather, comes out beating a drum. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I misunderstood this, but it sounded he wasn't really talking about Christmas. He spoke about the celebration of Ramadan, which is all about a time of reflection. So I'm assuming they don't celebrate traditional Christmas.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. And so there's a signpost outside of each of these storytellers that provides additional information about the holidays. And the Morocco one sort of gets right to the point and says, in Morocco, the overwhelming majority of residents are Muslim and celebrate several holidays this time of year. And it goes on to provide descriptions of each of the holidays, including Ramadan. What's interesting is that Tarji, who I believe premiered in 1996 along with the rest of the storytellers, was retired at some point and replaced by a female storyteller named Farah. Now, she has since been replaced by a music group as well. But Farah, or maybe it was Farah, her presentation was far less focused on Ramadan than was Tarji's. Hers was more about sort of the wedding cultural traditions in Morocco. And then at the end, she got into Ramadan a little bit. And, what the politics of that might be, I mean, I'm probably not qualified to comment on that, but it just seems interesting to me that, about 10 years in, there was a shift from a very Ramadan-focused presentation to one that was less so.
And there's also talk of New Year's celebrations for them as well. Overall, I think they did a nice job. In several cases, they had to find something other than Christmas to talk about that's just about the celebration of the season and not about Santa Claus or Christmas per se. And this was one of them. As you said, a musical group has replaced it now. They're called Sahara Beat. And yeah, so that's Morocco for now. But then between Morocco and France, we have the celebration of Hanukkah, which you're going to talk about.
Yeah, so I've always loved the Hanukkah storytellers at Epcot. For many years, there was a... I know why you do, Jeff. For many years, there was a female storyteller over in the America Pavilion, and she had a very small little sort of kiosk in which she would come out and tell the story of the Maccabees and the menorah and sing various Hanukkah songs. And they took that idea a few years ago and put it on a bigger stage with a whole new character, now a male character named Zachary, who has Fiddler on the Roof energy. He comes out and yeah, there's like a little violin overture, and I feel like it's intentional. And he is much more of a character with a backstory all his own, as opposed to the storyteller who preceded him. And it's really a captivating story. I mean, he is this college student who has just returned from study abroad. He's been around the world, and he has observed Hanukkah traditions, not only in America and Israel, but also in other parts of the world, like Africa and Turkey and a few other places he mentioned. So that's like a very cool, unusual perspective on Hanukkah. And what I love about this Zachary performer or character is that he offers live singing and live violin playing that's just seamlessly integrated with the storytelling. So he'll sort of like stop and start and just weave in and out of song. And one of the songs he performs is a song called Ochos Candelicas. And I am obsessed with this song. I knew it prior to the Hanukkah presentation from, and this is a Disney connection. Do you know what I'm going to say, Jeff?
I don't, but like my mind went to Pete's Dragon just because I'm talking to you, but I don't know.
I wish. No, a newer Disney movie, Frozen, because Idina Menzel, her second holiday album, includes a cover of Ochos Candelicas. Now, in Epcot, the performer, he does it in English, but Idina Menzel does it in its original language, which is a dialect that is specific to this locality in Spain. It's like a Spanish enclave where they speak a blend of Hebrew and Spanish. And the song, as she records it, is a bop. So if anybody listening loves Idina Menzel or loves this storyteller or loves Hanukkah, go check out her recording of this song and then also watch his performance on YouTube.
Excellent. And one or a couple little fun things I learned watching this, because I don't know a ton about Hanukkah, even though I have a bunch of Jewish friends, so I really should learn more. But I didn't realize the candle burned for 8 days, even though there was only enough oil for one, and that's why they light the 8 candles. I was like, no kidding, that's so fun. And supposedly he mentions that they also eat a lot of foods cooked in oil to remember this miracle candle oil. And I was like, no kidding, this is some fascinating stuff here.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that story, I believe, is that I'm not Jewish either, but I believe that 8 days was the exact amount of time that was required. So it wasn't even like coincidentally, it just lasted 8 days. It was like it just fit the bill, which is pretty cool.
I love it.
Yeah.
Let's head over to Germany, where we have Helga, or at least we used to have Helga. Now, this is a very traditional German female character person, I should say, in a dirndl. Is that how you pronounce their clothing? I think it's a dirndl.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, so a lot of Christmas traditions apparently originated in Germany. Things like decorating your home was something that started in Germany. And the invention of the Advent calendar, which I don't know about you, but as a kid, I very often had an advent calendar and loved opening those little things and eating the chocolate or whatever was in there. Did you ever do that?
I never did. Advent wasn't really a part of our Christmas celebration, but Helga always made me wish that I had one because she made it seem so fun and exciting. And she has this great joke where she says, the term Advent is a German term. And then she'll ask an audience member, do you know how to say Advent in English? And they'll say Advent. And she's like, oh, you're bilingual. It's great.
Yeah. We also get the story of the first ever Christmas tree where Martin Luther, who was a minister, was walking through the woods and was overcome by the beauty of the starlight sparkling off of the tree. So he cut it down and brought it home. And there we have the very first Christmas tree, which I thought was interesting. And the invention of the nutcracker is from a German Christmas story as well. So a lot of nice little Christmas connections that we just think about here in the States as like our traditions, but are not.
Yeah, and that's really the grand finale of Helga's show is the Nutcracker, because when she first takes the stage, there's a lifeless stationary Nutcracker there, and then by the end, a living, moving Nutcracker has joined her, and so that's always a really nice moment.
Yeah. Now she was around a while ago. She was replaced by Dirch and Dirch. Was that a musical group, or was that?
Yeah, Dirch and Dirch, not my cup of tea. They were a group of young rockers who did punk rock versions of Christmas songs, both American and German. To their credit, they would tell stories about German Christmas traditions. In fact, largely the same stories that Helga told in between their songs. But it always felt a little try-hard for me, as if Disney were using them, culturally appropriate as their performance may have been, using them to sort of appeal to a youthful demographic in Epcot, one that I think was no longer interested in that genre of music. And that might be why they didn't stick around very long. Last year, I believe, they were replaced by a new all-female a cappella group of singers called Chili Demure or something like that. And they do a very lovely set of all German Christmas songs. And they also tell the same stories that Dirch and Dirch told.
Cool. Let's head over to Japan.
So Japan is another one of the countries that does not principally celebrate Christmas. And so we don't have a Christmas story here. Instead, we have the traditional Japanese New Year. And that story and its traditions are told to us by Daruma, who is a street vendor who's, or rather she's a vendor selling the Daruma doll, which is a traditional Japanese child's doll that is sold with no pupils in the eyes and no arms and legs. And all of that is symbolically significant. So the children will paint in one pupil as they make their wish for the new year. And then if and when the wish comes true, they paint in the other pupil. And the lack of limbs on the doll is there to signify patience and persistence through the ups and downs of life that the next year will surely bring. And so what I love about these couple of different shows that focus on the new year is that they're really focused on reflection and on sort of getting yourself ready for what the next year is going to bring you. So it's always very uplifting and encouraging.
Now, is this one always performed by a female, or does this switch off? Because it doesn't really matter. They're not really playing a character other than a street vendor.
Yeah, I don't think that it matters unless these vendors are traditionally female in Japan. I'm not sure, but I don't think I've ever personally seen a male in the role.
Okay, cool. Now over in China, I gotta say this was definitely my least favorite. This is the Monkey King. I don't know, how do you feel about this one?
Yeah, I mean, the Monkey King, it's a very nice story unto itself, and I think the actors were always very good. The thing that never quite clicked for me with the Monkey King is that this story, which is a Chinese legend, doesn't relate, as far as I can tell, to a holiday. And so
at all.
Yeah. So it just doesn't really make sense. And to Disney's credit, this is no longer one of the offerings. It has now been replaced by the Chinese lion dancers, who are there to celebrate the Chinese Lunar New Year. But
which makes so much more sense, right? And Disney has done so much. I don't know how far back they started, but I feel like they've done so much with the Lunar New Year that I can't believe it wasn't that way from the beginning, to be honest. Because like you said, this one, from what I could tell, had nothing to do with a holiday. It was just more about teaching patience and enlightenment, and frankly, a kind of creepy character. This guy that, he comes out with this face paint and all gold with these animal print clothing and this crown. And it was just a bit of a weird performance. Wasn't my cup of tea.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, my understanding of the Monkey King is that in Chinese culture, this is a character with many, many stories. Stories that are told throughout the year. And I think the presentation of him in Disney combined a couple of his most famous stories into one. And it did sort of have the cadence of a holiday narrative. I mean, the kind of epic adventure that he went on reminds me a little bit of like the Rankin Bass special, Santa Claus is Coming to Town. It sort of has that feel about it. So that's the only way in which I can see it working. But I agree with you that transitioning to a Lunar New Year story or performance was the right call.
Now, you said he has many different stories in China, so he's essentially the Mary Poppins of China. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's one way to put it.
Cool. Now we got to go to Italy, because La Befana, oh my gosh, this woman is a treat, and I know you love her, so I'm going to let you tell the story.
An absolute treasure, hands down. My favorite.
Future Disney legend,
please.
Says Aaron Wallace.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. In fact, they should just make the La Befana Awards.
Wait a sec. If they were going to give a Disney Legend Award to her or to Father Christmas in United Kingdom, who would you give it to? If you were the deciding vote.
I believe the performer who plays Father Christmas is much, much older. So I would give it to him first because he deserves to be recognized while he's still with us.
Okay.
But my favorite storyteller, I have to say, is La Befana, in large part because she is a witch. She's a Christmas witch. While we're on it, by the way, she has real Sophia Petrillo energy. And in fact, I have to say...
He's talking about the Golden Girls.
Golden Girls, yes.
Don't know that name.
The eldest of the four Golden Girls. And what a lost opportunity on Disney's part back in the 80s and 90s, by the way, to never make a La Befana feature film starring Estelle Getty in that role. What a classic we would have on our hands today had they done that. But alas... La Befana is a Christmas witch who goes in search of the Christ child. What a concept! First of all, the whole, as a kid who grew up in like Southern Baptist, rural North Carolina, the whole idea of a Christmas witch looking for Jesus would be enough to make people's heads spin. And so, to me, like the concept has always seemed kind of brave and daring, and I love it so much. And I love that she's so sincere in her telling of the traditional Christmas story of Jesus from a very unique perspective. It all has to do with her encounter with the three wise men, and then she goes behind them to find the Christ child, but she's too late. By the time she gets there, the star is gone. They've packed up the nativity and they've left. And so she spends the rest of eternity visiting children on the eve of Epiphany in January to find the Christ child. And she looks in each child's face to see if maybe it's him. And whether it's him or not, she leaves them a gift. And so that's sort of the legend of La Befana. Why she thinks a child wouldn't have aged in 2,000 years, that part I never fully understand, but it's okay because she's such a delight. And the acting here is just like top notch.
One of my favorite performances, I would say. And the thing that I love is when she came walking out at the beginning, I was like, she looks like a witch. Like that, I literally thought, in fact, I wrote in my notes, witch. And then when she introduces herself as a witch, I was like, even though I had that initial thought, I was surprised to hear her say that because I'm like, we're telling Christmas stories here and you're talking about a witch. I mean, my Halloween loving self went crazy. I was like, this is perhaps my new favorite Christmas story. Like, I need to do some more research on her, frankly. Like, are there children's books in Italy about La Befana? Because if there are, I need to get my hands on some.
Yeah, there are. And you're right. I mean, she comes out, she's got gray hair, she's got a broom. And if you Google La Befana Italy Christmas, you will see that the cultural depictions of her, like in parades and things like that in Italy, she looks even witchier and scarier than she does in Epcot. So, I mean, what an underutilized character this is, even in American media. I think she's fascinating. And you're right, Jeff. I love the juxtaposition of Halloween and Christmas. obviously there's A Nightmare Before Christmas, but even something like A Christmas Carol. I mean, it is fundamentally a ghost story set at Christmas. In fact, I think the original subtitle for that novella was A Ghost Story of Christmas. You've got the song, It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year, and they talk about telling scary ghost stories at Christmas time, which used to be part of the Christmas tradition, I think, in Europe. So there's like a long strand of history going back to the origins of Christmas, where like the supernatural was tied in with this holiday. And I think that's part of why we find this so thrilling.
Okay, so Disneyland has Haunted Mansion Holiday. Magic Kingdom should have Haunted Mansion La Befana. Boom.
I would die.
Done. I love that idea. And frankly, like, the whole mixing of us Halloween fans, we just want it to be Halloween year round. So we'll take anything we can to get Halloween into our lives. And I know Krampus over the last decade or so has become a huge Christmas thing for Halloween fans. Hollywood is missing out with La Befana, is all I've got to say. And I probably shouldn't say that publicly, because I should do something with this. La Befana needs a movie or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I honestly, I hope that the angle on it is sort of like a family film with edge, something like Hocus Pocus, another Disney witch movie. So I really think Disney is
I went to Halloween Tree. My head went to Halloween Tree.
Well, speaking of Halloween Tree, and maybe we get to this at the end, I think that's very relevant to the discussion of the storytellers in general and what they might do with this at Halloween time. Like, I would love to see Halloween storytellers around Epcot.
Oh, in Epcot.
In Epcot.
Oh, here's the thing. Isn't that mostly, I know it's gone further now, but isn't it, I'm sure every country has their own scary stories, which is probably the angle they'd need to go, because it's mostly an American holiday. That
You're right, and I think that would be the challenge, but as you just said, I think you go from one culture to the next, and you find something that contemplates reverence for the dead or dealing with death, whether it's Day of the Dead or I imagine there are different cultures like that around the world. And then Halloween, of course, is growing and taking on its own manifestations around the world. And so I think there's potential for it. And the Halloween Tree is sort of case in point, because that's part of what that story is about, is experiencing Halloween celebrations around the world. And David Kirshner was on your podcast, Jeff. I forget if it was Disney Coast to Coast.
It was that Halloween podcast. Yeah.
And he talked about sort of the potential in a Disney park for the Halloween Tree, which I totally agree with. And I know he was talking about it in Disneyland, and I'd love to see more of that there. But I think there's potential for that in Epcot as sort of the basis for Halloween storytellers around the world.
I 1,000% agree with you and think that should be a thing. Here's the problem. The animated version of the Halloween Tree that David Kirshner made is Hanna-Barbera, and now Warner Brothers, who also owns Hanna-Barbera, is getting ready to make another Halloween Tree movie. So I just think it's tied so much to something that isn't owned by Disney that they wouldn't embrace it that much. But I mean, I think they should. I think that would be wonderful.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. Though we do have the Halloween Tree in Disneyland, and there is the long Ray Bradbury connection with Disney. So maybe there's a way to do it, but you're right. There would be challenges.
Yeah, in that episode of That Halloween Podcast, which if you haven't listened, you should listen to, That Halloween Podcast. It was one of the earlier episodes of that, and he started talking about, he's doesn't think that the Halloween tree at Frontierland and Disneyland is as grand as it should be based on the story. And he came up with this idea of making the Tarzan treehouse into the Halloween tree. And I was like, honestly, my mind was blown when he said that, because I could just see it done so simply. And I want to see that so badly become a reality now that I just think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but La Befana, very much how, like in Canada, how he didn't, reference the fact that he really was Santa Claus, even though we saw him transforming into it. Does she mention that she is searching for the three wise men? Does she ever say three wise men?
Well, so she talks about, I think she refers to them as the three kings or something like that. And she says that she met them, but then she tells us that she is searching for the Christ child. And so, yeah, I do believe, I'd have to go and study the script, but I believe that we are supposed to understand that the woman we are encountering is indeed La Befana herself. And she talks about Santa Claus at the very beginning. She asks a child in the audience, who brings you gifts every year? They say Santa. She says, well, in Italy, it's La Befana, which is interesting. I'm not sure that that's entirely accurate. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an expert, but I think Italy has both Santa and La Befana because she arrives on the eve of Epiphany after Christmas.
I was wondering the same thing, and I was like, Italy, I feel like they have a Santa Claus or Father Christmas or St. Nicholas or something. So I would have to research that as well. But I'm so thrilled that she is at Epcot because it's such a great story that I knew nothing about. Clearly, I know this is one of your favorites as well, so it's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Mexico with the Mexico Storytellers, who are essentially the three kings. We actually have three performers as part of this one. So we have the three wise men. They're covered head to toe in their traditional robes, and they talk about the 9-day journey that Mary and Joseph took from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Las Posadas is what they talk about every night from December 16th through the 24th. And then they talk about Three Kings Day on January 6th. And on February 2nd, the Day of Purification. So there's a lot of holidays and celebrating within these stories. Now, these folks aren't around anymore, right? They've been replaced by Las Posadas Celebration.
That's correct. And Las Posadas Celebration, which I think there was a year or two where they were called Fiesta de Navidad. They are essentially Mariachi Cobra, who are the music group in Mexico year-round. And they come out accompanied by some holiday-garbed mariachi dancers, and in between their songs they too tell the stories of Mexican cultural traditions during Christmas, and it's a wonderful show, and the music is so great, and everyone in that music group is so talented. So I love having it, but I wish we could have that and the Mexico Storytellers, who I think for years were called, if I can get this right, my Spanish is terrible, Los Tres Reyes Magos, essentially, as you said, the Three Kings. But yeah, they were great. Their costumes were wonderful. And I have always just really loved Mexico's Christmas traditions. I grew up in a church, a Mennonite church of all places, but we did sort of the journey of Mary and Joseph through Bethlehem. And it's just such a cool way to celebrate Christmas that we don't do so much here in America. And I tell you, this brings up a subject for holidays around the world that I wish we could see developed, which is the idea that when these storytellers reference snacks or foods that are part of the traditions, I wish you could go to the pavilion and get every food item that's referenced, because a lot of the storytellers do make reference to specific foods. And it's always seemed like a missed opportunity and kind of a letdown to me that you can't do that.
Especially in Epcot.
Yeah.
That feels like such a given. How is that not a thing? That's very surprising. I mean, talk about mixed marketing, promotional missed opportunity that Disney's got there. That's crazy. Man, come on. Between Halloween storytellers and selling the food in the stories, Aaron Wallace is doing your job, Imagineers. Just listen to him.
We'll put you in charge of raising the Santa twins and me in charge of planning the holiday snacks at Epcot.
A lot of these have been, replaced by musical groups. Do you feel like it's going in a direction where eventually they will all be musical groups? And or do you like the mix, or do you prefer they all be storytellers?
I think it's in response to this viewpoint that you often heard articulated throughout the years, which is that it all felt a little overwhelming or redundant to go to all these storytellers. It was sort of get old, you lose your appetite for it after maybe 4 or 5 of them. I never felt that way. I love hearing each of these stories, even if I do spread it out over a couple of days. Music groups are great too. I wish we could integrate both, but you don't necessarily learn from the music groups in the way that you do from the storytellers. Hanukkah is, or rather I should say Kwanzaa is a great example of that. I know we're going to get to it later, but we had a Kwanzaa storyteller who really just downloaded a lot of knowledge on the audience about Kwanzaa. And today we have music groups who sort of mention a little bit about the history of Kwanzaa as they sing songs, but you aren't learning nearly as much. I think that's a shame.
Like I said, that's kind of the Epcot way, I would say, in the 21st century. So I get it. They need to entertain people. Nobody's going to sit and listen to people, preach on or tell stories if it's not entertaining. So I do get it, but it is a shame because these are really interesting. But like we said, this is great for annual pass holders who can go a couple times and experience all these. But the day guest, we'll be lucky to catch 1 or 2 because guess what? Spaceship Earth, Test Track, those are still the priorities for most people. It's not going to be these storytellers. So I get it.
That's probably true, but I will say that if you're there for your annual trip and World Showcase would be a part of your Epcot Day, holidays or not, this is honestly one of the best ways to experience those pavilions. Like, I would say maybe even more so than just walking through them on your own. Like, you're really getting direct, memorable engagement with these cultures in the form of entertainers.
Yeah, I really do hope I get to experience them sometime, which is interesting because as a kid, I used to go to Walt Disney World very often, not very often, but several times the day after Christmas and go for a week. And so I'm sure that these were there. I was just probably at an age where it just was not a priority for me. But being lucky enough to go as often as I do, I would totally take the time and see as many of these as possible. I think that they're great. Let's get to Norway, though. I will let you talk about Norway. This one was kind of fun.
It's fun. It's bonkers, at least to the American mindset. But I think even in their story, they refer to this character, Huli Nesson, who is a Christmas gnome and barn Santa. As odd. And I think he's intentionally odd. And he's very loud. This is by far the loudest of the performances. But essentially, this is the story of we meet this, I guess she's like a farm girl named Sigrid. And she's talking to us about how in Norway, yes, they have Santa Claus. But there are many people out in the farmlands of Norway who still believe in this older tradition of these gnomes who live in the rafters of their barn and bring about various good fortunes throughout the year. And one of them is specifically a Christmas gnome, also known as the barn Santa, also known as the Nissa. And in this case, his name is Huli Nesson, but she doesn't believe in him. She says that's sort of like an older tradition. And as she's telling us the story, one of these gnomes appears behind her, and we, the audience, can hear and see him, but ostensibly she cannot. So she's continuing the story, and he's kind of mocking her disbelief while she's telling it. And then this is where it gets really weird, because he starts to work his magic and starts to control her. And at one point actually possesses her.
And starts screwing with her, let's just say it. Like, he's totally messing with her.
Yeah. It's not what you expect at all from a holiday story, but I think that's part of what makes it special. This is the one I find that everyone remembers. This and La Befana, I think, because they stand out as so surprising. But the acting here, again, is so good, particularly in the part of the actress playing Sigrid, because she has to move in a way that is being controlled in part by this barn Santa, but she can't know that she's being controlled. And she has to often move in unison with him, but at times she can't see him, and at other times she can see him, but can't let on that she does. So there's just a lot of mental work that has to be going on for her, and it's always done so seamlessly. And I'm just always very impressed by the talent level.
Yeah, and this is one that, correct me if I'm wrong, this one's still around today, right?
That's right. Yeah, and I think is a real fan favorite.
That's good to hear, because I would expect if they were going to start cutting down storytellers, it would be ones that involve more than one performer just for cost-saving purposes. So it's great to hear that this one's still around. And, obviously it's really popular, so it's a good reason to keep it around.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we have no more than 5 years before this is Anna and Elsa's holiday wish or whatever, but...
Frozen telling the traditions of...
Oh, yeah.
Or rather, Olaf telling the traditions of Norway.
It honestly seems inevitable. So enjoy this while it lasts. But this is another one. There's a reference to traditional Norwegian Christmas porridge. And I want to walk into the pavilion and buy that porridge, and I can't.
Now let's talk about the, American pavilion at Epcot. And this has changed quite a bit through the years. But of course, Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus are there. But they don't tell any stories because essentially we know them, right? There's no real storyteller telling the story of American Christmas. But at one point, the Hanukkah story that you talked about earlier was part of the American pavilion. It's now between Morocco and France. And do they just leave it there like as, hey, it's between Morocco and France, or do they associate it with one of the countries?
I don't believe it's associated with one of the countries anymore. And maybe that was the purpose of moving it, or maybe it was more of just a crowd flow thing. I'm not sure. But it used to be, I mentioned those scrolls. It used to be that when you walked up to the American pavilion, there were 3 scrolls at one point side by side. So you had one telling sort of the traditional American story with Santa Claus and whatnot. And then you had one for Kwanzaa, one for Hanukkah. And all of those events unfolded in this same pavilion, along with the Voices of Liberty, who at Christmas perform as the Dickens carolers. And then, of course, in the evenings, the Candlelight Processional, which also features the Voices of Liberty. So there's a lot that happens as part of holidays around the world, as they used to call it, in the America Pavilion. But yes, over time, they moved Hanukkah out and then phased out the Kwanzaa Storyteller altogether.
Okay, you mentioned the Candlelight Processional. I just want to mention, because the Candlelight Processional is such a huge topic of conversation all to itself, and it's so spectacular. Last year, I recorded an episode with our good buddy Ruben all about it, episode 695 of Disney Coast to Coast. Check that out. It's so good, and I know you're obsessed with it and could go on forever about it. How many times a year do you typically see the Candlelight Processional?
As many times as I can, sometimes multiple times on the same night. It does depend in part on who the narrators are for the year, because I have some who I always want to make sure I see. But yeah, love that show so much. And I loved your discussion with Ruben about it last year too.
Well, it was so much fun because Ruben has taken part in it for so many years, and it's so great. Did Carol Channing ever, was she ever the narrator of a Candlelight Processional? I feel like that'd be great, wouldn't it?
Merry Christmas, everyone.
I was just about to say, I almost would rather Jeff DePauli as Carol Channing.
Listen, I'll do it.
Narrating.
If they would like I think that would be great. Has Bette Midler ever done it?
No, but she should. She would be great. And here's the thing. They get really big names. Not everybody is a huge name, but a lot of them are. I mean, Whoopi Goldberg, Neil Patrick Harris. And, when these big name celebrities show up, the crowds show up for them. But yeah, they pull their own.
Oh, I would fly into town for Rick Moranis. I would be there. You would get a phone call and say, Aaron, I need to crash at your place. Rick Moranis is reading the Candlelight Processional.
And I would be there with you. We need to make this happen, Jeff.
Absolutely. Let's do it. So USA, it's changed through the years. As you said, Kwanzaa now is part of something called Joyful, which is a musical group that performs right at the entrance to World Showcase, right?
Yeah, so Joyful has performed at a few different spots over the years. For a long time, they were up by the Fountain of Nations in Future World. Then they were moved to the entrance of World Showcase. This year, they're moving indoors. In 2020, they'll be in World Show Place. It seems strange to me in the year 2020 to move an outdoor show indoors. I'm not sure what the rationale there is. But I have to say, Joyful is one of my favorite things in life, not just in Epcot. I love their show so much. It is a Black gospel choir that comes in and sings a collection of gospel songs and Christmas songs, and recently also a Kwanzaa selection of songs, which essentially are R&B and pop songs that have been culturally significant to Black Americans throughout the years. And there's a little bit of storytelling that goes along with those performances, but that began at the same time that the Kwanzaa Storyteller was phased out. So I love having that element there, but again, you don't learn nearly as much about Kwanzaa as you did in the past.
Yeah. So that is essentially these storytellers around World Showcase. I think this is an awesome tradition. I've said it before. I really want to experience this in person. I think it's great. Is there anything else you want to add before we get to some trivia?
Let's do trivia.
All right, here we go, folks.
Do you know the answer? Get your brain gears churning and play along. It's trivia time.
Alrighty, Aaron, do you want to hit me with the trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
You can ask me first this time.
All right, I'm sure you know the answer to this, but I think it's super fun and cute, so I'm going to ask you anyway. In the ride Journey into Imagination with Figment at Epcot, Figment is adorning an ugly Christmas sweater this year for the holiday season. What is unique about his ugly Christmas sweater?
I don't know, but I'm going to say it has Dreamfinder on it.
No, it has the Journey into Imagination circle swirling logo, like that, the traditional Epcot logos. It has that worked into the sweater.
That's very cool.
Have you?
I was worried you were going to say, no, I haven't. I didn't even hear this news. But I was worried you were going to say that it has the Eric Idle moon face on it.
That's, in one of the scenes, perhaps it does. Now, I've got to ask you just because, did you hear my episode with Tony Gardner?
I did. And, obviously I'm very familiar with Tony Gardner. Like you, had no idea that was true. And it blew my mind. And the following week after I recorded that, I was in Epcot. Of course, I snapped a photo and texted it to him, and he had a good laugh over that. I was like, look, your work's still here. Of all the things you did for Disney, Eric Idle Moonface, still here. Unbelievable. Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to say it. Tony Gardner put him on the list of Disney legends.
I wouldn't be against that. Heck, his work is incredible and is obviously very humble. I just keep plugging other episodes. Several weeks back, folks, I interviewed Tony Gardner, who did makeup effects for Alien Encounter as well as Hocus Pocus, and apparently a ton more, as I discovered in the interview. So check that out if you haven't. I particularly enjoyed that episode, so I think you will as well. Anyway, Aaron, what's your question for me?
Okay, so speaking of World Showcase at Christmas time, at the end of the night after Illuminations, or what used to be Illuminations, and the fireworks holiday tag plays, there is a special music loop that plays around World Showcase. That music loop originated with a now defunct attraction. Can you name that attraction?
This is a total guess. I'm going to say Horizons.
Very well. I'll give you a hint. It's a seasonal attraction, or maybe offering is a better word.
Seasonal offering, music, Walt Disney World or Disneyland?
Walt Disney World. In fact, Epcot.
Oh, gosh. I guess I don't know my Epcot Christmas history well enough. I have no idea. What would that be?
The Epcot Lights of Winter, which was the giant light display as you left Future World and entered World Showcase.
The Archway of Lights, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's right.
Interesting. Actually, you want to know something really stupid? I should have known that because I literally just finished a book about the Disney Parks holidays that I'm interviewing somebody about, and that was a little factoid in that book. So shame on me. I literally just read it right before we recorded. But that's fun. I like that. Fun fact.
It is, yeah.
Good stuff. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. I know how much you love it. I love it as well, even though I haven't experienced it. But before I let you go, why don't you let folks know what you're up to, where they can find you, and when your next podcast episode's coming out?
Ask me after January 1st, Jeff.
Okay.
I'll make the New Year's resolution more specific by then. But in the meantime, if people want to find me online, you can go to my website, AaronWallaceOnline.com. That's Aaron with 2 A's. And you can find me on Twitter at Aaron Wallace or on Instagram at Aaron H. Wallace.
Fantastic. Well, Aaron, thanks so much. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas, Jeff. Thanks.
And folks, if you haven't listened to last Wednesday's episode, be sure and check it out as I spoke with Disney legend Don Iwerks about his Disney legend father, Ub Iwerks. And on next Wednesday's episode, I speak with a co-author of the new book, Holiday Magic at the Disney Parks, Celebrations Around the World from Fall to Winter. I absolutely loved this book, and you're going to love our conversation. The easiest way to make sure you don't miss any of the magic is by subscribing to Disney Coast to Coast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Wherever you search, don't forget, it's Disney with a Z, Coast to Coast. And don't forget to click the link in this episode's description to order your DCTC 2021 calendar right now. Plus, the last live stream Q&A of the year is coming up, so head over to patreon.com/DisneyCTC to see how you can join in on that. That's patreon.com/DIZNEYCTC. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. This podcast is part of the DePodcast Network. Learn more about this show, plus find more quality and entertaining podcasts at DePodcastNetwork.com. That's DEPodcastNetwork.com.